Adults ignored 9-year-old Emma, thinking she was just a child. But when the plane's engines failed and the pilots lost control, everything changed. Passengers screamed, the crew gave up hope, and Emma calmly walked to the cockpit. With skills no one expected, she saved 147 lives. 24 hours later, the president called her with a shocking invitation. Before you watch full story, comment below from which country are you watching. Don't forget to subscribe. Emma Martinez sat quietly in seat 14C, her small legs swinging slightly as she colored in her aviation-themed coloring book. At 9 years old, she was flying alone from Phoenix to Washington, D.C. to visit her grandmother, wearing the bright yellow, unaccompanied minor badge that made every adult on the plane treat her like a delicate package that needed constant watching. Flight attendant Sarah Johnson checked on Emma for the third time in an hour, speaking in the slow, simple voice that adults always used with children. "How are you doing, sweetie? Do you need anything? Maybe some juice or cookies?" Emma looked up from her detailed drawing of a Boeing 737's engine system, complete with labels for the turbine blades and fuel injection system. "I'm fine, thank you," she said politely, then returned to her work. Sarah glanced at the technical drawing with mild concern. Most 9-year-olds drew flowers or animals, not airplane engines with precise mechanical details. "That's a very interesting picture, honey. Do you like airplanes?" "I love studying how they work," Emma replied, not looking up from her coloring. "Did you know that if both engines fail, a commercial jet can glide for about 100 miles from cruising altitude? The glide ratio is approximately 17-1 for most aircraft this size." Sarah blinked, not understanding half of what Emma had said. "That's very smart of you, dear. Maybe you should watch some cartoons on your tablet instead? All those airplane facts might give you bad dreams." Emma nodded politely but didn't put away her aviation books. Adults never understood her interest in planes. Her parents thought it was inappropriate for a little girl to spend hours watching airplane accident investigation videos and studying flight manuals. They kept buying her dolls and dress-up clothes, hoping she would develop normal interests for her age. But Emma couldn't help herself. She was fascinated by how these massive metal machines could fly through the sky, and even more interested in what happened when things went wrong. She had watched every episode of Air Crash Investigation multiple times, studied the technical reports from the National Transportation Safety Board, and spent countless hours on flight simulator programs that taught her how pilots handled emergencies. Her parents thought she would outgrow this phase, but Emma's knowledge kept growing deeper and more technical. She could explain the difference between hydraulic failure and engine failure, knew the emergency procedures for rapid decompression, and understood how pilots used backup systems when primary controls failed. The businessman in seat 14B, Mr. Richards, offered Emma a piece of gum as the plane prepared for takeoff. "First time flying alone, little one?" he asked with a patronizing smile. "No, sir, this is my 8th solo flight," Emma replied, carefully putting away her coloring supplies as the flight attendants began their safety demonstration. Mr. Richards chuckled. 8 whole flights. You're practically a pilot yourself." He clearly thought this was adorable rather than taking her seriously. Emma watched the safety demonstration with intense focus while other passengers ignored it or played on their phones. She had memorized every word of the presentation and knew that most people paid no attention to information that could save their lives in an emergency. She noticed that the nearest emergency exit was 6 rows behind her, the life vest was under her seat, and the oxygen masks would drop from the ceiling if cabin pressure was lost. Captain Robert Hayes and First Officer Jennifer Walsh were experienced pilots with combined flight time of over 30,000 hours. Captain Hayes had been flying commercial jets for 15 years and had never encountered a serious emergency. As they climbed to their cruising altitude of 37,000 feet, everything seemed routine for Flight 447 to Washington, D.C. "Weather looks good all the way to D.C., Captain Hayes told his co-pilot as they leveled off. "Should be a smooth flight today." Emma felt the subtle vibration in the airplane that told her they had reached cruising altitude. She opened her tablet and began reading a technical article about hydraulic system redundancy in modern aircraft. Her parents had tried to install parental controls to block these scary websites, but Emma had figured out how to bypass them months ago. For 2 hours, the flight proceeded normally. Emma read about aviation safety while other passengers watched movies, slept, or worked on laptops. Flight attendants continued checking on her frequently, offering snacks and activities that she politely declined. To everyone around her, she was just another child being shuttled between divorced parents or visiting relatives. Nobody suspected that Emma had spent 3 years studying aviation disasters with the intensity of a graduate student. She had read accident reports, analyzed cockpit voice recordings, and memorized emergency procedures for dozens of different aircraft types. Her young mind absorbed technical information like a sponge, and her photographic memory allowed her to recall exact details from hundreds of aviation incidents. At 2:47 p.m., everything changed in an instant. A loud bang echoed through the cabin, followed by violent shaking that threw passengers against their seatbelts. Oxygen masks dropped from the ceiling as warning lights flashed throughout the airplane. The aircraft suddenly tilted to the left and began losing altitude rapidly. Adult passengers immediately panicked. People screamed, cried, and grabbed onto their seats as the plane shuddered and groaned around them. Mr. Richards turned pale and began praying loudly. Other travelers were hyperventilating or calling loved ones on their phones. Emma remained completely calm. The symptoms were obvious to her trained eye: rapid decompression, possible engine failure, and loss of hydraulic pressure based on how the aircraft was handling. She quickly put on her oxygen mask and looked around to assess the full situation. In the cockpit, Captain Hayes and First Officer Walsh were dealing with multiple catastrophic failures simultaneously. The number 2 engine had suffered an uncontained failure, sending metal fragments through the fuselage and causing rapid decompression. Worse, the engine explosion had damaged hydraulic lines, leaving them with limited control over the aircraft. "We've lost engine 2 completely," First Officer Walsh reported, her voice tight with stress. "Hydraulic system A is showing 0 pressure, and system B is intermittent. I'm not sure we can control this aircraft." Captain Hayes was fighting with the controls, trying to keep the plane level as it continued losing altitude. "Declare an emergency with air traffic control. We need to find the nearest airport and get this plane on the ground immediately." But their problems were getting worse by the minute. The damaged hydraulic systems controlled the flight surfaces, landing gear, and brakes. Without hydraulics, the aircraft would be nearly impossible to land safely. They had backup systems, but those were also showing signs of damage from the engine explosion. Flight attendant Sarah Johnson was trying to keep passengers calm, but she had never dealt with anything like this before. Her training covered basic emergencies, but multiple system failures with structural damage was beyond anything she had learned. She could see that some passengers were going into shock, while others were becoming hysterical. Emma unbuckled her seatbelt and stood up, despite the violent shaking of the aircraft. She had studied this exact scenario in her aviation research: uncontained engine failure with hydraulic damage on a twin-engine aircraft. She knew what needed to happen next, but she also knew that no adult would listen to a 9-year-old girl during a crisis. "Sit down, honey," Sarah called out, rushing toward Emma. "You need to stay in your seat with your seatbelt on." "Ma'am, I need to talk to the pilots," Emma said calmly, her young voice cutting through the noise of panicking passengers. Sarah looked at Emma like she had lost her mind. "Sweetie, the pilots are very busy right now. This is a grown-up problem and you need to stay in your seat where it's safe." Emma realized that her age was going to be the biggest obstacle to helping everyone survive. Adults had been dismissing her knowledge for years, and now their lives depended on someone taking her seriously. She needed to prove that she understood the situation better than anyone else on the plane. "Ma'am, we have an uncontained engine failure in the number 2 engine," Emma said, using precise technical language. "The engine fragments have damaged the fuselage and caused rapid decompression. Based on the aircraft's behavior, we've also lost primary hydraulic pressure, which means the pilots can't control the flight surfaces properly." Sarah stared at Emma in shock. The little girl was describing their emergency using language that Sarah barely understood. "How do you know all that?" "I've studied aviation accidents for 3 years, Emma replied, steadying herself against a seat as the plane lurched again. "I know what the pilots are dealing with right now, and I know there are procedures they might not have considered because this type of emergency is very rare." Other passengers were starting to notice the conversation between the flight attendant and the little girl. Mr. Richards called out from his seat, "What's she talking about? Does she know what's happening?" Emma turned to address the passengers directly. "We've had an engine explosion that damaged other systems. The pilots are working to control the aircraft, but they're dealing with problems they may have never encountered before. I've studied cases like United Flight 232, Aloha Flight 243, and Japan Airlines Flight 123. I know what techniques can work when normal procedures fail." The businessman looked at Emma with a mixture of amazement and disbelief. "You're 9 years old. How can you possibly know about airplane emergencies?" "Age doesn't matter when people's lives are in danger," Emma said simply. "I need to help the pilots before we run out of time." Sarah Johnson made a decision that would save everyone's life. Despite every instinct telling her that a child couldn't possibly help in this situation, she had heard enough technical knowledge from Emma to realize this wasn't a normal 9-year-old. Okay, Emma. What do you think the pilots should do? Emma's face lit up with determination. First, they need to stop trying to maintain altitude. Fighting the aircraft is wasting their strength and making the situation worse. They should enter a controlled descent while they work on backup systems. Second, they need to prepare for a manual landing using differential thrust steering, which means controlling direction with engine power instead of rudders. Sarah didn't understand most of what Emma said, but she could tell it was sophisticated technical knowledge. Do you want to talk to the pilots? Yes, ma'am. But they probably won't listen to me because I'm a kid. You might need to tell them that I have information about emergency procedures they might not know. Sarah picked up the interphone that connected to the cockpit. Captain Hayes, this is Sarah. I have a passenger who says she has information about emergency procedures for our current situation. Sarah, we're extremely busy right now, came the captain's stressed voice. Unless it's a medical emergency, it will have to wait. Sir, she's describing our exact problems using technical language I don't understand. She says she's studied airplane accidents for years and knows procedures for this type of emergency. There was a pause. What kind of passenger? Is this someone with aviation experience? Sarah looked at Emma, who was calmly reviewing a mental checklist of emergency procedures. She's a 9-year-old girl, sir. But she's using words like uncontained engine failure and hydraulic system damage, and talking about other airplane accidents. Another pause, longer this time. Send her up, but someone needs to supervise her. We can't have a child in the cockpit during an emergency. Emma walked toward the cockpit with Sarah, passing rows of frightened passengers who stared at her with confusion. They couldn't understand how a little girl could possibly help when experienced pilots were struggling to control the aircraft. Some passengers called out warnings, thinking Emma was wandering around unsupervised during the crisis. The cockpit door opened to reveal Captain Hayes and First Officer Walsh fighting with unresponsive controls. Both pilots looked exhausted from the physical effort required to keep the aircraft somewhat level. Warning lights flashed throughout the cockpit and multiple alarms were sounding. You're the passenger with aviation knowledge? Captain Hayes asked, glancing at Emma with obvious skepticism. Yes, sir. I know this looks strange, but I've studied your exact situation extensively. You have uncontained failure of the number 2 engine with secondary damage to hydraulic systems, correct? First Officer Walsh stared at Emma in amazement. How does a child know those terms? Emma launched into her analysis with the confidence of an expert. Based on the aircraft's behavior, you've lost most of your hydraulic pressure, but you probably still have manual reversion capability. Instead of trying to maintain level flight, you should establish a controlled descent at about 1,000 feet per minute and use differential thrust to control your heading. Captain Hayes was too desperate to dismiss help from anyone, even a 9-year-old. We've been trying to maintain altitude because we're over mountainous terrain. Sir, fighting the aircraft is making your control problems worse, Emma explained. In the case of United Flight 232, Captain Haynes discovered that working with the aircraft's tendencies instead of against them gave him better control. You need to let the plane descend while you practice controlling it with engine power. The two pilots exchanged glances. They had both heard of United Flight 232, where a DC-10 had crashed in Iowa after losing all hydraulic systems. What else do you know about that accident? First Officer Walsh asked. Emma's eyes lit up as she shared her extensive knowledge. Captain Al Haynes had a training pilot named Dennis Fitch helping in the cockpit. Fitch figured out how to steer by adjusting thrust on the remaining engines. When they needed to turn right, they reduced power on the right engine and increased power on the left engine. The plane would naturally turn toward the engine with less power. That actually makes sense, Captain Hayes admitted, looking at his engine controls with new understanding. Emma continued, the key is making very small power adjustments and waiting for the aircraft to respond. Big power changes will overcorrect and make things worse. Also, you'll need to land at a much higher speed than normal because you can't use flaps or slats properly without full hydraulic pressure. First Officer Walsh was implementing Emma's suggestions, and immediately felt the aircraft become more manageable. She's right. When I stop fighting the controls and just guide it gently, I have much better response. There's more, Emma said urgently. You need to contact the airport and tell them to phone the runway and have maximum emergency equipment ready. Also, clear all other aircraft from the area because your approach might not be stable. And most importantly, the flight attendants need to prepare passengers for a very hard landing. Captain Hayes was amazed at the depth of Emma's knowledge. How do you know all this? Are your parents pilots? No, sir. My parents think my interest in airplanes is weird for a little girl. But I've studied every major aircraft accident investigation for the past 3 years. I've read the NTSB reports, watched cockpit voice recorder transcripts, and learned from every mistake and every success. Over the next 30 minutes, Emma guided the pilots through advanced emergency procedures that weren't covered in standard training. She explained how to calculate their glide ratio with one engine, how to time their power adjustments for steering, and how to prepare for a landing without normal braking capability. The pilots discovered that Emma's knowledge was incredibly detailed and accurate. She knew specific aircraft systems, understood the physics of flight, and had memorized procedures from multiple accident investigations. Her young mind had absorbed technical information that many professional pilots never encountered in their careers. Emma, we're starting our approach now, Captain Hayes said as they descended toward the airport. Are there any other techniques we should know about? Emma reviewed her mental database of similar emergencies. In the case of DHL Flight 8832, they discovered that landing gear extension uses a different hydraulic system. You might be able to get your gear down even if other systems have failed. Also, don't try to flare for a soft touchdown. Come in steady and let the aircraft hit the runway firmly. The goal is to maintain control throughout the landing roll. As they approached the airport, Emma's predictions proved accurate. The landing gear extended successfully using backup systems, and the pilots were able to maintain reasonable control using the thrust differential techniques she had taught them. The aircraft was still difficult to handle, but it was controllable. Attention passengers, this is Captain Hayes, came the announcement over the intercom. We're making our final approach now. Thanks to the assistance of a very knowledgeable passenger, we've been able to establish control of the aircraft. Please prepare for a hard landing and remain seated with seatbelts tight until we come to a complete stop. The landing was rough but successful. The aircraft touched down at 180 miles per hour instead of the normal 140 miles per hour, bounced twice, but stayed on the runway. Captain Hayes used reverse thrust and differential braking to keep them straight as they rolled to a stop. Fire trucks and ambulances surrounded the aircraft immediately, but everyone aboard was safe. As passengers evacuated down the emergency slides, many of them sought out Emma to thank her. They had witnessed a 9-year-old girl calmly directing the emergency response while adults panicked around her. Mr. Richards shook her hand with tears in his eyes. You saved all our lives, Emma. I'll never doubt a child's intelligence again. Flight attendant Sarah Johnson hugged Emma tightly. I'm so sorry I almost didn't let you help. Your knowledge saved everyone on this plane. Emma smiled shyly. I just did what I've been studying. I'm glad it helped. The media arrived within hours of the emergency landing. News crews couldn't believe the story of a 9-year-old girl who had guided professional pilots through a crisis they couldn't handle alone. Emma's parents flew to Washington immediately, amazed and proud of their daughter's heroic actions. We always knew Emma was special, her mother told reporters. But we never imagined her airplane obsession would save lives. Emma became an instant national sensation. Videos of her calm, technical explanations went viral on social media. Aviation experts appeared on news programs to verify that her knowledge was accurate and sophisticated. Pilots from around the world praised her understanding of emergency procedures. 24 hours after the emergency landing, Emma was having breakfast at her grandmother's house when the phone rang. Her grandmother answered, then handed Emma the phone with wide eyes. Emma, this is President Johnson, came a familiar voice. I've been following your incredible story, and I'd like to invite you to visit the White House. The entire country wants to thank you for your heroic actions. Emma's jaw dropped. The president? Really? Really? We're planning a special ceremony to honor civilian heroes, and you'll be our guest of honor. We also have some aviation officials who want to meet with you. They're very interested in understanding how you learned so much about aircraft emergencies. The White House visit was scheduled for the following week. Emma would meet with the president, tour the Oval Office, and speak with officials from the FAA, NTSB, and NASA about her knowledge of aviation safety. She was also invited to visit the Air and Space Museum and meet with test pilots who were amazed by her technical understanding. When the day arrived, Emma walked into the White House wearing her best dress and carrying a folder full of her aviation research. President Johnson greeted her personally, kneeling down to her level to shake her hand. Emma, you've shown the entire world that heroes come in all ages, the president said. Your quick thinking and knowledge saved 147 lives. We're all very proud of you. The ceremony was attended by aviation experts, government officials, and media from around the world. Emma received the Presidential Medal of Freedom, becoming the youngest person ever to receive the honor. She also met with NASA officials who offered her a place in their youth education programs. Emma has demonstrated that passion and dedication can overcome any barrier, including age, said Dr. Sarah Mitchell, NASA's Director of Aviation Safety. Her knowledge of aircraft systems and emergency procedures rivals that of experienced pilots. We want to support her continued learning in aviation. During her White House visit, Emma also met with Captain Hayes and First Officer Walsh, who had flown to Washington specifically to thank her again. Captain Hayes had told investigators that without Emma's guidance, they would not have been able to control the aircraft or execute a successful landing. Emma taught us techniques that aren't in any training manual, Captain Hayes explained to reporters. Her understanding of how aircraft behave during extreme emergencies came from studying real accidents, not just textbook scenarios. She saved our lives and the lives of everyone on that plane. The aviation industry began implementing changes based on Emma's insights. Airlines started reviewing their emergency training programs to include scenarios like differential thrust steering and manual reversion techniques. Flight simulators were updated to teach pilots the unconventional procedures that Emma had learned from studying accident investigations. Emma's story also sparked discussions about how society treats children with unusual interests and advanced knowledge. Education experts pointed out that Emma's parents could have stifled her aviation obsession, potentially preventing her from developing the expertise that saved lives. Emma's case shows us that we should nurture children's interests, even when they seem inappropriate for their age, said Dr. Robert Chin, a child development specialist. Her fascination with aircraft accidents wasn't morbid curiosity, it was serious academic study that prepared her to save lives when the moment came. Emma returned to school as a celebrity, but she remained humble about her achievement. She continued studying aviation with even greater passion, inspired by her experience and the encouragement she had received from professionals in the field. Her parents fully supported her interests now, understanding that their daughter had a rare gift for technical learning. The accident investigation revealed that Emma's analysis had been completely accurate. The uncontained engine failure had damaged multiple systems exactly as she had predicted, and the emergency procedures she recommended were the optimal response to the crisis. Professional investigators were amazed that a 9-year-old had correctly diagnosed and solved problems that challenged experienced pilots. Emma's heroic actions changed how the aviation industry viewed emergency training and response procedures. Her story proved that knowledge and capability weren't limited by age, and that unconventional thinking could provide solutions when standard training failed. She had transformed from a dismissed child with weird interests into a national hero whose expertise saved lives. 6 months later, Emma received another call that would change her life forever. NASA offered her a scholarship to their advanced aviation program, where she would study alongside adult pilots and engineers. At 10 years old, she became the youngest student ever accepted into the program. Emma represents the future of aviation safety, said NASA Administrator Dr. Jennifer Walsh. Her ability to synthesize information from multiple sources and apply it to real-world emergencies is exactly the kind of thinking we need to prevent accidents and save lives. Emma's journey from overlooked child to presidential honoree demonstrated that heroes could emerge from the most unexpected places. Her obsessive study of aviation disasters, which adults had dismissed as inappropriate, became the exact knowledge needed to save hundreds of lives during an unprecedented emergency. She proved that wisdom and capability weren't determined by age when lives depended on someone stepping forward with the courage and knowledge to help. As Emma continued her studies and grew older, she never forgot the lesson from that terrifying day at 37,000 feet. Sometimes the most important thing you can do is share what you know, even when nobody expects a 9-year-old girl to have the answers that could save everyone's life. The aftermath of Flight 447 brought unexpected changes to Emma's life beyond the presidential recognition. Aviation companies from around the world contacted her family, offering scholarships and internship programs. Boeing invited her to tour their manufacturing facilities and meet with their safety engineers. Airbus wanted her to participate in their youth advisory panel for emergency procedure development. Emma's school created a special independent study program allowing her to pursue advanced aviation courses while maintaining her regular elementary education. Her teachers were amazed by her ability to explain complex aerodynamic principles using simple language that even kindergartners could understand. She became the school's unofficial science ambassador, inspiring other students to pursue their own unusual interests without fear of being different. The documentary crew that followed Emma's story for 6 months discovered something remarkable about her learning process. Unlike adult pilots who learned procedures through repetition and practice, Emma absorbed information by understanding the underlying physics and engineering principles. She didn't just memorize emergency checklists, she understood why each step worked and could adapt procedures for situations that weren't covered in standard training. Dr. Patricia Williams, a child psychology expert who studied Emma's case, published research showing that children's brains were actually better suited for certain types of technical learning than adult brains. Emma's story challenges our assumptions about age and capability, Dr. Williams explained in her report. Children's neural plasticity allows them to make connections between different systems and concepts that adults might miss. The Federal Aviation Administration created the Emma Protocol, new guidelines requiring airlines to seriously consider technical input from any passenger during emergencies, regardless of their age or background. The protocol was named after Emma and mandated that flight crews receive training in recognizing expertise from unexpected sources. Emma's parents started a foundation called Young Experts United, which identified children with advanced knowledge in various fields and connected them with professionals who could nurture their talents. The foundation discovered dozens of children across the country who had been dismissed by adults despite having sophisticated understanding of medicine, engineering, computer science, and other technical fields. Captain Hayes and First Officer Walsh became frequent visitors to Emma's home, bringing her technical manuals and sharing stories from their flying careers. They credited Emma with teaching them that emergency situations required creative thinking beyond standard procedures. Both pilots became advocates for including unconventional problem-solving techniques in pilot training programs. The aircraft manufacturer conducted extensive analysis of Flight 447's emergency and used Emma's insights to improve their emergency systems. They discovered that several of her suggestions for backup procedures were more effective than the manufacturer's original designs. Her understanding of how multiple system failures could cascade through different aircraft components led to enhanced safety features in newer aircraft models. Emma received letters from thousands of children around the world who had been inspired by her story. Many shared their own interests that adults had dismissed as inappropriate or too advanced. A 12-year-old boy in Japan wrote about his expertise in nuclear physics. A 10-year-old girl in Germany explained her advanced understanding of cardiac surgery procedures. Emma's story had given these children confidence that their knowledge was valuable, regardless of their age. The international aviation community invited Emma to speak at the World Aviation Safety Summit when she turned 10. Standing at the podium in front of 500 professional pilots, air traffic controllers, and safety experts, Emma delivered a presentation about learning from accidents that received a standing ovation. Her speech was later published in multiple aviation journals and became required reading at several flight training schools. Emma's influence extended beyond aviation safety. Medical schools began studying her case to understand how children could contribute to emergency medical situations. Engineering schools examined her problem-solving approach to develop new teaching methods. Military academies analyzed her calm decision-making under pressure as a model for training future officers. The NTSB invited Emma to participate in accident investigations as a technical consultant. Her ability to synthesize information from multiple sources and identify patterns that professional investigators might overlook proved invaluable in understanding complex accidents. At age 11, she became the youngest person ever to contribute to official NTSB accident reports. Emma's hometown erected a statue in her honor, depicting a young girl with an airplane model in her hands and the inscription, "Emma Martinez, proving that heroes come in all ages." The statue became a popular destination for families, and Emma often visited to meet with other children who shared her passion for aviation and technical subjects. The academic community began studying what became known as the Emma effect, the phenomenon of children developing expert-level knowledge through self-directed learning and obsessive interest in technical subjects. Universities created new programs designed to identify and nurture young people with advanced capabilities, regardless of their formal educational background. Emma's story influenced changes in how airlines handled unaccompanied minors. Instead of treating children as packages to be supervised, flight crews now engaged with young passengers to understand their interests and capabilities. Several airlines reported discovering children with medical training, engineering knowledge, and other skills that could potentially assist during emergencies. The ripple effects of Emma's heroic actions continued expanding years after Flight 447. Her demonstration that age didn't determine capability inspired changes in education, professional training and emergency response protocols across multiple industries. She proved that society's assumptions about children's limitations were often wrong and that dismissing young people's knowledge could literally be a matter of life and death. As Emma entered her teenage years, she continued balancing normal adolescent experiences with her extraordinary reputation in aviation circles. She attended regular high school while also taking graduate-level courses in aeronautical engineering through online programs. Her classmates knew her as the girl who had saved an airplane, but they also knew her as someone who helped them with homework and worried about typical teenage problems. Emma's relationship with her parents evolved as they learned to support her unusual interests fully. They realized that their initial concerns about her inappropriate fascination with airplane accidents had nearly prevented her from developing the expertise that saved 147 lives. Her father became an advocate for parents of gifted children, speaking at conferences about the importance of nurturing rather than redirecting children's intense interests. The aviation industry continued implementing safety improvements based on Emma's insights years after her heroic intervention. Her understanding of how human psychology affected decision-making during emergencies led to new crew resource management training. Her analysis of backup system interactions resulted in improved aircraft designs that better supported manual control during multiple system failures. Emma's story became a case study taught in leadership courses, demonstrating how effective leaders could emerge from unexpected circumstances and backgrounds. Business schools analyzed her calm communication during crisis situations as a model for managing high-stress decision-making environments. Military academies studied her ability to maintain focus and think clearly while others panicked around her. The international recognition Emma received opened doors for other young people with advanced knowledge and capabilities. Universities began actively recruiting teenagers with demonstrated expertise in technical fields. Professional organizations created youth advisory boards to tap into the fresh perspectives that young minds could provide on established problems and procedures. As Emma approached her 16th birthday, she reflected on how the terrifying emergency on Flight 447 had transformed not just her own life, but had also changed how society viewed children's potential contributions to serious adult situations. Her story proved that heroism and expertise could emerge from the most unexpected sources, and that listening to unconventional voices during crisis situations could mean the difference between tragedy and triumph. Emma Martinez had started as a dismissed child with weird interests and had become a symbol of the untapped potential that existed when society was willing to look beyond age and appearances to recognize true knowledge and capability. Her legacy would continue inspiring future generations to pursue their passions fearlessly and to speak up when their knowledge could help others, regardless of whether anyone expected them to have the answers.